Shalom. I'm Rabbi Davidovich, speaking to you on behalf of the Web Yeshiva, speaking to you from Efrat, Israel. This week's Parsha is Parsha Shemot. Parsha Shemot takes place after Joseph dies, is buried, and the Jews are now in Egypt. We're going to talk about one important lesson that we learned from this particular Parsha, which is a lesson of how to identify with another person's pain. And we will see from this Torah reading and from the sources I will cite to you that this is an essential quality of Torah, a basic quality, identifying with somebody else's pain. Let's look at the story as it unfolds in Shemot. We have a new Pharaoh who comes on the scene. And he makes one after another harsh and oppressive decrees against the Jewish people, to the point that not only does he enslave them with hard labor, not only does he require them to do a certain quota of building every day, but then makes them make the bricks as well, and severely punishes anybody who doesn't meet their quota. It gets worse as it goes on, with horrendous atrocities committed by the Egyptians against the Jewish people. In the midst of all this, we have the birth of Moses. Now, Moses was born at a time when all the Jewish boys were being thrown into the Nile River to be drowned because Pharaoh's advisors told him that the savior of the Jews is going to be a boy that's born. So therefore, he was going to kill all the boys. And unfortunately, many hundreds of thousands, if not more, of infants were killed. The story of Moses, everybody's familiar with. He was placed in a little container, waterproof container, and put on the Nile River, and his sister stood by on the shore to watch what was going to happen. And then Pharaoh's daughter came, rescued him, heard his cry, rescued him, then asked for a Jewish nursemaid to come and take care of him. And that's what the Torah talks about. And for the first 2 years, as the Midrash says, Moshe did not go into Pharaoh's house. But after 2 years old, he went into Pharaoh's house. We don't know how long he was there. There are various Midrashim, but Midrashim basically say that at some point, Moshe grew up, became the ruler of Ethiopia at the time. Then he moved to Midian, then he came back. We don't know the exact time sequence as to when all this occurred. But there's an interesting concept, an interesting story that is told in this week's Parsha. And of course, as I said before, these are not stories. They're very important life lessons. And the Parsha says, Vayi bayami mohem, it was in those days, Vayigdal Moshe, Moshe grew up, became great. We don't know if it means chronologically or in stature. Vayetze el Echav, and he went out to his brothers, Vayar b'siv losam, and he wanted to see their burdens. There's some very interesting midrashim on this. The midrash says that he wanted to see, he saw and he cried about what's happening to his fellow Jewish people. Remember, he was still a prince in the house of Pharaoh at this time, and he went and saw what was happening. Not only did he cry, but he went to help them with their burdens. He took the burdens of the bricks on his own back and started helping them that way. And that's why the Torah tells us he saw their suffering. He felt their suffering. And then it goes on to say, Vayar ish mitzri mak ish ivri me'achiv. He saw an Egyptian man beating up one of his Jewish brethren. Vayifen kovako. And, growing up in the palace, he thought, there must be law in this place. I'm not sure how he could have thought that, but he looked here and there to see if there's anybody to come and stop this. I mean, here's an act of violence taking place in the streets of Egypt. And he said, Vayar, he says, he saw Amish, and there was nobody there. There was nobody who was willing to stand up. Vayachetz HaMitzri, he killed the Egyptian to protect the Jew that he was beating up. The concept of Vayar es Sivlosam, that he saw their burdens, is a very important concept. We have in the Ethics of the Fathers, the Pirkei Avot, in the 6th chapter, in the 6th section of that chapter, it enumerates the number of times by which one can acquire Torah. It says, Torah niknei ba'arba'im v'shmona devarim. There are 48 things, 48 ways to acquire Torah. One of these ways, it says, nosei ba'ol im havero, to help his friend with his burden. Now, the Yerocham Levovitz says that all of the mitzvos of the Torah are dependent on this trait of helping your friend with his burden. This is the foundation of Torah and mitzvos. He says not only between man and man, but between man and God. Avram Twersky, Rashid Twersky, Dr. Twersky, discusses this. And he says there are basically 3 ways you can feel other people's pain. The first is sympathy. You're talking to somebody, they've got a problem, you're sympathizing, oh, I'm so sorry about it. That's one way, sympathy. A higher level, he says, is empathy. Not only are you talking about what is happening, but you're actually feeling it. But he says the highest level is identifying with the pain. Identifying with the pain. This is what Moshe was doing when he went as a prince of Pharaoh to help with the burdens and to carry them. He was identifying with the pain. It wasn't just an abstract concept. And this is something that we have to learn, that the Torah wants us to love each other, but we need to identify with each other's pain, to feel the pain. It's not enough to just intellectually say, oh yeah, I'm sorry, you've got these problems. And empathy is good, sympathy is good, but really identifying, when you basically are standing in his shoes, the person's shoes with the pain, and you're identifying that pain, that's how you acquire Torah. I will just close with one concept that I've mentioned before, that Moshe Feinstein went into a class of young kids learning Gemara for the first time, and they were studying Masechta Bava Metzia, which deals with civil laws. And he asked, why do we start the study of the oral law with studying civil laws? And the answer was that you cannot have a relationship between man and God unless you first have a relationship between man and his fellow man. that is the message that we have to learn. Not only between us and from one Jew to another, but from one human being to another. Let us not close our eyes and our hearts to the suffering around us. Let us identify with it. And by identifying with it, hopefully we can correct it or try to correct it. Thank you all for listening. On behalf of levyeshiva.org, I wish everybody a wonderful Shabbat, and we'll talk to you, God willing, next week.